Hello and welcome to the 13th episode in the series Found Christianities. I'm Dr. David Litwa, and I am so glad to be able to share this information with you. The Treatise on Resurrection, which is also called the Letter to Reginus, comes from the Nag Hammadi Codices, Book 1, Treatise 4. It is the most important Christian reflection on the resurrection since 1 Corinthians 15. And it is an amazing contemplative piece. So here's the rundown on the basics. The author is unknown. He doesn't say who he is, which itself is significant. But we know that at least he was a Valentinian Christian teacher of the mid-2nd century, and that he spoke with an incredible boldness and vivid imagery, which suggests that he was a master teacher. He writes to Reginus, who is perhaps a man of Italic descent, and later a larger circle of Christians is invoked. And so this quite possibly is both it's not exactly a private letter. It's meant, as so many of Paul's letters, to be read by a wider circle and then more widely circulated to those who ask for it. The author seems to be writing before 2 Timothy, a letter under a false name in the New Testament, supposedly by Paul. This author of 2 Timothy opposes those who believe in a so-called present resurrection, and that indeed seems to be what the author of the Treatise on Resurrection is saying, or at least partially. There is a future aspect to his understanding of resurrection, but it is, in many ways, a very present event. The letter to Reginus also seems to precede later Christian controversialists who insist on the resurrection of corpses. That is, the resurrection of flesh. And it's the late 2nd century and 3rd century where we start getting these very wacky, one might say, discourses on what happens if a shark eats your body and then other humans catch a shark and then they eat the shark. So, what happens to the matter in your body when Christ comes back, and is it resurrected? And this resurrection of the flesh involves all sorts of these conundrums, and that is not at all what this author is dealing with. He doesn't even seem to be aware of that reflection. For this author, resurrection is made possible by the incarnation, because he gives us this first statement of two-nature Christology, that is, Jesus was the Son of God and the Son of humanity, and he combines them both. And it's really by divinizing that human portion of him that the resurrection is made possible. And what is truly human here? Well, it isn't actually the flesh, which we see grow old and die and shed like a garment. It is that human spirit or mind within, which is a deeper aspect of ourselves even than the soul or the animate portion of ourselves. That's that aspect of ourselves which makes our bodies alive. There's something much deeper. And this realization that our inner selves are already immortal and divine is a divinization. And that knowledge is taught by Christ. So the resurrection is modeled by Christ, it's also taught by Christ. It isn't the raising of corpses. It is an epiphany of our present immortality. It is a disclosure, the author writes, of reality, of what truly is. Another way he talks about it is the resurrection is as if we are simply being transferred or retracted back into the sun. Our mind or our spirit is light, and as the sun shoots out its rays, resurrection is as if the sun were to simply retract those rays back into itself. He acknowledges, the author that is, acknowledges that there is a resurrection of flesh and soul, and he's aware that some people do, some Christians do believe in that. But the resurrection of the spirit or your mind swallows up those other lesser forms of resurrection. And compared with the reality of resurrection, this world is an illusion. We saw in the Gospel of Truth that Valentinus, or someone of his circle, depicted this world as a kind of vision, a nightmare. And that is not saying that the world is bad, but it's just saying that compared with the reality of our immortal mind, everything we see around us is like an illusion. It's like a virtual reality game, we might say. But that's the reality of resurrection. It simply is. And in that sense, you don't even need to argue for it, because you could simply realize the truth. If you simply realize the truth, you understand resurrection. And what's special about this is that, since he's not arguing for resurrection of corpses, this understanding of resurrection is as applicable in the second century as in the 21st. One of the interesting things that we find in the treatise is the author comes into conflict with those whom he calls philosophers, those who think professionally. And we know that by the late second century, outsiders, Galen and Celsus and people of that nature, were making fun of Christians who believed in the resurrection because they were viewed as simple-minded. Well, for the author of the Treatise on Resurrection, faith isn't for the most simple-minded of Christians. Faith, in fact, is a sign of one's intellectual maturity. Because faith is the instant recognition and acceptance of the truth. That's all that it is. It's the ability to recognize reality and then to immediately accept it. And those who have to sort of work themselves up to acceptance to prove it to themselves are, in fact, on a lesser level of intellectual maturity. And that's the argument against philosophers, that they can't accept resurrection because they don't have that faith, obviously. And that's not an anti-intellectual stance. In fact, that's a pro-intellectual stance. Faith is cognitive assent and the ability to assent to the truth. Now, there's a lot more, and in fact, there's so much more in this very short letter. And again, if you listen to the last episode, the Gospel of Truth, the letter to Ruginus is right after the Gospel of Truth. So if you get yourself a copy of the Nag Hammadi library, and sometimes on Amazon it's called Nag Hammadi Scriptures or something to that effect, you can read the Gospel of Truth in the third treatise of book one, and then immediately after there is the fourth treatise, which is the treatise on resurrection, or the letter of Ruginus. And these two things will probably take you half an hour to read, but really they should be read very, very slowly, because they're absolutely packed with information, or read simply over and over and over again, because that's what it takes and what it requires to really come to an understanding of this rich spiritual, or if you prefer, mystical teaching of earliest Christianity. For now, I thank you all for listening and encourage you to look up all the facts, data, and footnotes in Chapter 13 of Found Christianities. Till next time, take care, and our next episode will focus on Marcion.